I got invited to play in one of the most stacked VGC draft leagues of all time. I'll be up against titans of the game like NAIC champion Federico Camporese, 3-time regional champions Michael Kelch and Justin Tang, and single battles legend Pokeaim, fighting over 10 weeks for a cash prize and ultimate bragging rights. Welcome to the MDBL. Now, we're not getting to the battles just yet, but in this video we're going to go over the drafts that each of our 12 players have got, the Pokemon they've picked, and kind of how they synergize, what the key strategies are, my analysis of them. Before we jump into the draft picks themselves, just as a quick overview, this is going to be a Regulation F draft. So anything that's legal in Regulation F is going to be legal in this draft. That's the pool of Pokemon we're picking from. We're doing it on a points-based system, so everyone has a certain amount of points to spend. Each Pokemon is worth a certain number of points. You'll see that as we go through the draft. You'll see the point values next to them. Should be reasonably self-explanatory. And we're doing a snake draft, which is how drafts should all work. So we've got 12 players, ordered 1 through 12 randomly. The picks go from 1 to 12, and then back from 12 to 1 again. And then just kind of repeats that over and over again. So that's kind of the structure of the draft, just to go over that before we start jumping into what the actual picks are. I'll be playing one game a week for the next minimum 5 weeks. So if you want to keep up with more draft content, do drop a sub to the channel and keep your eyes peeled for that. And first up, we have Skraw, who has got a very interesting draft here, which seems to be very much kind of a good stuffs kind of composition. And what I mean by that is it's just got a lot of very solid Pokemon with no one kind of main central strategy. We'll see a couple of teams later on here that do have more of a kind of centralizing strategy around them. Skraw's is very... I mean, firstly, it's a little bit top-heavy, with kind of Fluttermane, Landorus, Therian, Tornadus, Incarnate, and Regidrago being the obvious standouts here. Very strong offensive core, 4 Pokemon that really enjoy having Tailwind up, clicking big spread moves, in most instances, Earthquake, Dazzling Gleam, Dragon Energy, Big Windstorm, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of going to be the 4 I think that most of his strategies are going to be built around. It's got 2 of the best special attacking threats in the game. So Regidrago and Fluttermane are very, very difficult to deal with. Dragon is one of the best offensive types in the game, and one of the best answers to it is obviously stick a Fairy type in front of it. But Skraw has the best Fairy type in Fluttermane. So that's a very good pair of Pokemon to have, largely because taking Fluttermane means that you take away probably the best check in the game to Regidrago from other people. That makes Regidrago a lot scarier in my opinion. That's going to be a big threat to look out for. Obviously you've still got options for Terra Fairy, that kind of thing. And that's maybe one thing that I think Skraw's draft doesn't cover that well, is being able to hit Fairy types. You've got no Steel or Poison types on the team that could naturally hit Fairy for super effective damage, right? So Terra Fairy is probably going to be one of the key strategies you're going to see to deal with that Regidrago, just taking neutral damage from everything on the team. It's got a lot of versatility. I did mention the offensive core of the Fluttermane, Lando, Tornadus, Regidrago, but it's also got options for redirection, sleep with Vivillon. It's got good speed control with Tornadus. Ceruledge has a setup option. Wo-Chien offers a lot of bulk. Quackvalve's obviously also a nice offensive option. Rounds out the team reasonably well, I think, as far as low value picks go. I think that's one of the stronger ones, and Wo-Chien is, I think, probably quite important to deal with potentially Trick Room based strategies. This team is very fast. There's no real slow option of the team unless you can Charge a Mug, but Charge a Mug's just kind of there. And yeah, as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of spread moves on this team, which I think a lot of other drafts lack, which does make this very scary. Overall, I think this draft is pretty solid. It does have a couple of things that are maybe a little bit exploitable. I think it's got a lot of good offensive options. I think it maybe could do with a bit more flexibility. Stuff like Regidrago, Fluttermane. I actually say that Fluttermane's got a good variety of options it can use. But like Regidrago, Tornadus, Landorus are all reasonably kind of stuck in a box. Regidrago clicks its big dragon moves, Tornadus is your speed control, Landorus. I mean, you can run EV, you can run Band, but fundamentally it's going to be kind of clicking a somewhat limited range of physical attacks. I think that's maybe one of the biggest issues with this draft, but those 4 Pokemon, particularly the kind of top ones there, are strong enough that I think you can get away with not being that flexible and not having that much coverage. Like we said, Fairies may be a bit of an issue, but there are answers. Next up, we have the host of our draft with his Victorious Victinis, MichaelderBeste. One of the top players in the world at the moment, won 2 regionals last season, won 1 the season before, knocked me out in top 4. I'm not bitter about it, but it's fine. And he's kind of just rebuilt his second place Worlds team. That's another thing he's done, is second place at Worlds. But he's kind of just rebuilt most of that with Dragapult, Heatran, Farig, Urshifu. Obviously, he doesn't have the Rillaboom, and Chien-Pao was his last, I want to say. But yeah, he's kind of weirdly done a decent job of rebuilding that entire team. Rapid Strike Urshifu is going to be very scary. That's probably going to be between that and Dragapult, the core of the offensive crux of this team in terms of being able to go fast, hit hard. And they don't really have any common type checks to them. Obviously, you want to put like Steel types or Fairy types in front of Dragapult, and Fairy can deal decently with Urshifu, but Water types hit those for neutral. Fighting obviously hits Steel for super effective. Heatran covers both those types very well. So between those three, you've got a very strong offensive core. Farigiraf also offers priority blocking, which is very nice in this format, especially if you want to run it next to like Scarf Urshifu, for example. You can stop fake outs. I think this team on the whole is very well rounded. I think it's got a lot of depth behind it. Glamour is also a very strong option, and weirdly one of the more versatile ones in draft. You can run Sash, you can run Assault Vest, you can run Power, Meteor Beam. It's got decent coverage, Energy Ball, Earth Power, that kind of stuff. Plus, if you want to run it more defensively, you can go for Toxic Spike stuff against, like there's Dondozos elsewhere in the draft that Toxic Spikes can be a bit of a hassle for. So that's a nice pickup. I think it's maybe a bit more on the expensive end, but that kind of core 6 that Michael's picked up here, you see the top 6 there on the screen, are very, very strong, and the bottom 5, he's the only person with 11 Pokemon, I think. There might be another one, but I mean, Makihita might as well not be there, really, but I think his 4 lower tier options in Ribombee, Avalugg, Foongus, and Rotom are all very strong picks. Rotom probably the weakest of them, despite being 5 points to Avalugg's 2. Rotom's not very versatile, like, it doesn't really get good flying stab. It's kind of just clicking Electrum. If you've got options for like Will-O-Wisp and stuff, but if you want to do that, you can always run support Dragapult. I think Ribombee, though, is a very, very versatile Pokemon, and versatility is a really, really strong trait to have in draft leagues. So Ribombee's got options like Tailwind, it's got Fake Tears, it can run Sunny Day, it can run Screens if you want it to. Having a Fairy type is always just a good thing. I mentioned earlier, Regidrago, very scary, because there are a real lack of Fairy types, but Ribombee fills that role. Avalugg, well, I guess maybe Avalugg's not that fantastic either, but it offers you a big physical attacker. Ice is a good offensive type. I think between that and Foongus, you get good anti-Trick Room options as well, with 2 very, very slow Pokemon. Foongus is a really good pickup for 4, I think. It's obviously not nearly as bulky as Amoonguss. I think even with Eviolite, it doesn't take hits as well as Amoonguss does. Just the difference in stats is very, very large. But it gives you a very slow option to deal with Trick Room, with Spore potential. It gives you, crucially, Redirection, which Michael doesn't have anywhere else on his team, which is nice if you're going for setup on any of your Pokemon. I don't think any of your Pokemon really set up that well, but it's an option if you want it. Plus, it gives you maybe your own Trick Room option with Farigiraf. You've got Trick Room plus Foongus. Seems decent. On the whole, I think this team is, like I said, very well rounded. It's got options for fast mode, it's got slow mode, it's got good type variety, it's got good lower end options. I think this is one of the scarier kind of all-round solid Pokemon type drafts. Again, not any one prevalent strategy, just a very good selection of options. Third on our list is Mr. Singles, Pokeaim with the Los Angeles Wakers. Pokeaim mostly known for making singles content, but he has had some very, very strong results in VGC as well. Got top 8 at, I want to say, Milwaukee last year in Reg I? It's not restricted yet, he was running Ho. You don't run Ho in single restricted. But yeah, he's got some strong VGC experience as well. And his team, I think, leans more towards a kind of prevalent strategy than the other teams have. Pokemon like Talonflame and Ursaluna really lean into kind of a Tailwind mode. The back half of his draft is maybe not quite as suited to that, but that core of like Talonflame, Rillaboom, Ursaluna, Spectria, Clefable, I think that 5 is very, very scary. You've got a lot of options with Redirection and Clefable. Again, another Fairy type, very valuable in a format where Fairy types are pretty scarce. Having a Fairy type Redirector is very nice. And you've got potential setup with Spectra. Spectra can run Nasty Plot Substitute if you want to. It's not nearly as scary as Calyrex Shadow on account of it doesn't have Astral Mirage, but it's still very threatening. It's very fast as well. And in a draft format, generally speeds become kind of more impressive than previously. I'll go over that a bit Actually, I guess Glamora in Michael's draft is a good example of that, where 86 base speed in normal regulation F, not amazing. But in like a draft league format, when you've got fewer Pokemon on opposing teams that are faster, that kind of speed stat is good. So Spectra's 130 is very, very, very fast in this format, because there's a very limited amount of Chenpows, of Fluttermanes, that kind of stuff, especially with the Talonflame on this team. So the primary strategy, I think, is going to be that redirection plus setup, or redirection plus big damage with Ursaluna. Like, it's a tried and true strategy with Ogerpon. You see it a lot, sticking an Ogerpon next to a Blood Moon Ursaluna and just letting the Ursaluna click massive damage. You can do that with Clefable here, plus you've got the Talonflame option for speed control, very nice next to Ursaluna. There is another speed control option with Galarian Slowbro with access to Trick Room, which can synergize quite nicely as well with Blood Moon Ursaluna, always an option. I think Pokeaim's back end has a lot of good options apart from Baynet, which is a shame. I love Baynet, it's such a cool Pokemon, but it sucks. It really sucks. But again, Feraligatr gives you a water type, which is nice on this team. Rounds out a kind of fire water grass core with Rillaboom and Talonflame. But it also gives you setup with Dragon Dance. Sheer Force Life Orb does a lot of damage. Bisharp, nice for anti-intimidate stuff. Incineroar, if you look at this draft, looks kind of scary. You've got Rillaboom doesn't like it, Spectre doesn't like it. Talonflame doesn't really like it, obviously Ursaluna can blast through it, but like Hawlucha and Feraligatr, both physical attackers, having that Bisharp as an option is kind of nice. Gives you some priority as well. Hawlucha, I think, is also a very nice pickup on this team. You've got the Grassy Seed option to activate Unburden with Rillaboom, which is nice. You can get Fake Out Swords Dance. Also gives you something that can outspeed opposing Tailwind teams without the need for your own Tailwind, which is a very nice option to have. So the lower cost options, apart from Baynet, all have a very strong niche. Like, they have very solid use cases. And again, it's one of those drafts where I think there's a lot of strong Pokemon here. The standout for me in terms of what people will have to respond to is probably the Blood Moon Ursaluna, and to an extent the Spectria. Those are the two that stand out as like, okay, I need to be able to stop this from just running through my entire team. Otherwise, very solid. You've got options, you've got redirection with Clefable, which is a very good pickup. So yeah, again, another very solid draft, very, very versatile, not really leaning too heavily into one thing or another, but it does have a couple of very big threats. It does lack a bit of physical damage, is maybe the thing I'd say. It's very specially offensive, which, again, not that common. Most teams that you see in these drafts are going to be mostly physically offensive. But yeah, maybe a lack of physical damage could also potentially be an issue somewhere, but there are options again to get around that with your bottom end Pokemon. Next up, moving on to a draft that very much doesn't really have any standout threats. It is going to be Lorcy with the Queen's Golden Goes, who has kind of just tried to make a balanced team and has kind of succeeded. He's got the Ogerpon, Half-Flame, Incineroar, Rillaboom trio, which we've seen be... Oh, not Rillaboom, sorry, it's Thwackey. But Thwackey is honestly kind of real in these formats, just on account of, like, it has terrain. You can run an Eviolite on it. It's not got terrible bulk. It's mostly terrain, to be honest. Fake Out and terrain is nice, plus pivoting. But we've seen Ogerpon Half-Flame being enabled by Rillaboom in like actual Reg F formats with Grassy Glide, like Sword Dance Grassy Glide is very, very threatening. So having that trio of Ogerpon, Incineroar, Thwackey is actually quite nice. And again, similar to Skraw taking away Fluttermane so that his Regidrago is a lot more threatening. The main thing you'd want to put in front of like Ogerpon, Incineroar, Thwackey in an actual Reg F format is going to be Incineroar, but of course Lorcy's got the Incineroar, so other people don't have that option, which is, again, a very nice kind of, you get a really strong core and also take away part of the counter to it at the same time. I think that's very good drafting there. The other thing that could maybe sit in front of those Pokemon are things like bulky fire types, dragon types as well. Primarina covers both of those very well, so Primarina is a nice pickup on that front. And I think, again, this is one of those drafts where some of them we've seen have a couple of duds, like Baynet, a couple of one-point Pokemon. Mountaih on Michael's team is not actually doing anything. But I think every single Pokemon in this team does actually have uses. Like, your only Pokemon below 10 points here are Thwackey, Chesnaught, and Clodsire. Which, as I said, Thwackey, very real in this format. Again, enabling Grassy Glide stuff with Ogerpon is very nice. Chesnaught, yeah, it's got some uses. I think maybe you've got too many grass types to really justify using it, but Clodsire, again, with Unaware is pretty nice. It's got decent typing. It's a Pokemon that can sit in front of Fairy types. Gives you options with, I don't know if you want to go Toxic Stall into Dondozo, you've got that option, like Unaware, Toxic, for example, could be interesting. So you've got uses for all the Pokemon basically all the way down the draft. The main kind of exploitable weakness I see with this draft is a real lack of positive speed control. Apart from, like, you've maybe got like Electro on Raikou, or you've got Icy Wind on Primarina or Gastrodon, but they're both very, very slow. They don't really benefit that much from it. And you've not got a huge amount of natural speed. Obviously, Raikou at 115 and Nogapon at 110 are pretty quick, but in a lot of cases, you aren't going to be moving first, and that I think is going to be a bit of a problem for this team. And Lorcy does have Trick Room options, particularly with the Bronzong being able to set it up, and then Rhyperior can abuse it. Gastrodon's decent under Trick Room just from being a slower Pokemon. Primarina can use it quite well. But the main issue is that you're not really going to be able to set it up reliably. Your only redirector is Hearthflame Pokemon, who doesn't want to be under Trick Room. You can maybe fake out with Incineroar and set Trick Room with Bronzong, but then, again, like, stick a Fire type in front of that, and you're not really doing anything. It's very, very passive. So I think the lack of speed control is probably the biggest exploitable weakness here. Other than that, though, like, it's a collection of very strong Pokemon, but it looks likely you're probably going to be moving last most of the time is the main thing I'd point out there. Gang, I am slightly ill as I record this, and my throat is going dry as hell, so forgive me if I get very croaky towards the end of this. Ugh. Let's go. Next up, we have Mountaih and his immunity idols. Bringing in the other Urshifu we saw Rapid Strike on Michael's team, we have got Urshifu Single Strike the Dry Bear on Mountaih's team, next to Goldengo, Whimsicott, Arachnid, and some other stuff. Those are kind of the top 4 picks. It's mostly, I think, in terms of the things to note, are going to be Dark Urshifu, Goldengo, Whimsicott. That offensive core is very, very scary. You've also got Electabuzz. I think Electabuzz slots very nicely into that core. Goldengo really likes a game plan where you can lead it next to a redirector. You can use that to get a Nasty up, then you bring in your Tailwind option once the redirector goes down. That's the Whimsicott in this case. You get Prankster Tailwind, you click Make It Rain. Very, very nice. Goldengo also synergizes quite nicely with Single Strike Urshifu, because Single Strike Urshifu, Dark and Fighting type, gets stonewalled by fairies most of the time. You obviously can run options like Poison Jab or Iron Head if you want to get around that, but the main thing here is the fairy types that want to sit in front of Dark and Fighting types. Goldengo hits them for super effective with Make It Rain. So that's a really, really nice pairing as kind of an offensive core to the team. And I briefly mentioned that Tailwind mode with Whimsicott and Goldengo, but that's also very nice for Urshifu. One of the things you often want to do in front of Tailwind is just protect your way through it, but obviously Urshifu's Unseen Fist makes that impossible. So having Tailwind and Urshifu on the same team, very, very strong option to go for just for all-out offense. There's also Mamoswine on this team I think is worth highlighting for that Tailwind mode. Ground and Ice are really, really strong offensive types. Mamoswine's a very powerful Pokemon. Can't be intimidated because of its ability, and also just a general lack of Intimidate in Draft League formats, which is nice. It means it can run Thick Fat and not worry about Intimidates anyway, which is always a bonus for it. But Mamoswine is really nice under Tailwind because of its middling speed. I think the rest of the team, though, kind of struggles to capitalize on Tailwind. So, like, Arachnid, Hydrapple, Stantler. I mean, Stantler's probably not going to feature that much, but having an Intimidate Pokemon's always a nice option. But yeah, the Arachnid and Hydrapple and the Berserker as well, kind of too slow to really make the most of Trick Room, and Munkidori has some good tools, but I think doesn't quite hit hard enough to really abuse that all-out offensive mode. So, I think where this team is gonna struggle maybe a little bit is if you can find a way to get through the Urshifu Goldengo combo and the Mamoswine, then, or if you can get your own speed control up, because the fastest thing outside of Whimsicott on this team is going to be Munkidori, which, like I said, isn't doing that much damage, or like Electabuzz, which again is not a damage dealer. Goldengo and Urshifu, the two main big hitters on this team, and Mamoswine are all not that fast, so opposing Tailwind could be a bit of an issue there. I think that's maybe one of the things that could be exploited, is a lack of depth in how you can abuse the Tailwind mode. I think that's not the only part of the team. I think with the redirection, you get a way around that. You've got Fake Out with Munkidori as well, which could be nice to keep your main threats alive. There's also kind of a Trick Room option with, like, Whimsicott and Stantler both get Trick Room. I think Munkidori also gets it, but you're not clicking Trick Room with Munkidori. But that's kind of what you'd want to be setting up to abuse Hydrapple or Arachnid, that kind of stuff. But you don't really have that option on the team, so I think there's a chance that some of these pieces end up not quite synergizing with the rest. But that said, I think the core of kind of 4 or 5, mostly the core of Urshifu, Goldengo, Whimsicott, Electabuzz, is really, really scary. So getting that core is a very nice set of Pokemon to pick up. I think maybe it's just the last few Pokemon that don't synergize with it that well. Next up, we have JT himself, Justin Tang, with his Baltimore Pangorioles. Now, Justin's basically built kind of a Sand Psyspam team, which is a very common archetype in Regulation H, where you didn't have legendary Pokemon involved or Paradox Pokemon, but now you've got extra Chi-Yu, extra Iron Bundle for a bunch of more offensive options that these kind of Sand teams would often quite like to have. Most notably, these teams with the core of, like, Indeedee, Sneasler, Garchomp, Tyranitar can often struggle into Grass types, namely Rillaboom, but Iron Bundle and Chi-Yu both threaten Grass types pretty hard. So that gives a nice synergy there. Corviknight as well does the same thing, but that gives you a very nice synergy with the Sand mode to get around Grass, and maybe bulky Water types as well with Freezai and Iron Bundle. Gives you some options there. It gives you checks that Sand teams otherwise don't often have to those kind of bulky Water and Grass types. There's also a really good range of speed options on this team. So you've got Sneasler, obviously, with Unburden and Psychic Seed is going to be one of the key strategies that Justin's going to use, I imagine, on this team. Sneasler fast enough that with Unburden, even if your opponent gets a Tailwind up, you're probably still outspeeding most of the Pokemon on their team. But you've got alternative speed control options as well with Corviknight's got Tailwind. Iron Bundle with Booster Energy and Icy Wind is very, very nice for this kind of team, especially next to Chi-Yu, for example, or even Indeedee. Clicking Icy Wind and a big spread move on those two is going to be a very scary strategy for Justin to potentially employ there. And there's not really a slow mode in this team. There's no Trick Room options apart from Devotion, but Devotion doesn't count. You're not bringing Devotion to anything. But between like Corviknight, Tyranitar, and to an extent even Chi-Yu does decently just type-wise into a lot of kind of Trick Room threats, you can kind of get around a lot of the Pokemon that want to be abusing Trick Room, so you're not too worried about that. Tyranitar in particular is very, very good at that in front of things like Psychic types, like your standard kind of Armor Rouge, you go Terra Flying, get around maybe a Glade. I'm just describing my own team, spoilers. But yeah, you've got options to get around slower teams there, which can be very, very nice. I think the main thing with this team is that it's basically impossible to cover for all of the offensive threats on this team at once. Like, you can't really cover for Garchomp T-Tar at the same time as covering for Indeedee Sneasler, and at the same time covering for Chi-Yu Iron Bundle, whilst at the same time not letting Corviknight set up in front of you, right? It's really hard to cover all of the options that this draft has, which I think makes it very, very threatening. I think maybe that does end up leaning a bit into, like, lead roulette at times, which could be a little bit dicey, but at the same time, again, you've just got so much in terms of kind of options on this team to play around whatever your opponent's leading into you that that's not too much of a problem. One thing I will say is I think the Pokemon themselves are not immensely versatile. Like, Indeedee Male only really does one thing, which is go fast, click, expanding force. Sneasler has a little bit of versatility, but most of the time on this team it's probably going to be just Swords Dance or just 3 attacks and swing. Chi-Yu's only really got Dark and Fire type moves. Corviknight. Corviknight's got a bit of versatility. Garchomp again is just going to be flicking physical attacks. Maybe it's Swords Dances. You could maybe go like loaded dice, Scale Shot. Iron Bundle is almost always going to be just speed control. You can run choice specs, but again, it's not really got coverage. Tyranitar, one of the more flexible Pokemon on the team, for sure, but I think a lot of the Pokemon here suffer from being not immensely flexible. The other main thing with this draft is that it is effectively a 7 Pokemon team. Like, Morgrem, you can maybe make a case for in some matchups. Like, it's got some use somewhere, but Duosion just isn't really a Pokemon. So, you've kind of narrowed the viable pool of Pokemon that you're going to be working with there, and Morgrem doesn't really synergize that well with most of the team. You can maybe use it with Tyranitar and Corviknight to set up screens, but otherwise the rest of the team doesn't really have enough bulk to make that work. Overall, though, I'd say this draft has quite a few reasonably telegraphed strategies, but you can kind of mix and match them enough, and they're scary enough and have so few common checks that even though the individual pairings maybe are a little bit telegraphed, it's still going to be very, very hard to get around. You've just got a lot of things that you need to be able to prep for. I need to get some water because my throat is so dry. Holy smokes. I'm back. I'm hydrated. Let's keep going. Okay. Next up is international champion FedeCampo with the Driftvale City Bears. And he has a draft certainly. I think one of the more confusing ones here. So, for a bit of background on this, Fede first picked Iron Crown, got Indeedee stolen from him, by me, don't ask, and then second picked Ogerpon, and then got Okidogi third, and then sent a message to our Discord server for this draft league at 3 AM on Christmas Day saying, trust the process. So maybe he's cooking something unholy that I just cannot see at this time. But this draft does seem like a little bit of a hodgepodge just on face value. Fede is definitely a good enough player that he can figure some stuff out, make it work. But it seems like this draft is the most kind of collection of good Pokemon of any of the drafts. So I think Iron Crown might be the least useful first pick of any first pick in this entire draft, which is unfortunate. Obviously, he would have liked to get Indeedee. I think maybe picking Indeedee first would have been the better option. That's what I did. I first picked Indeedee. But yeah, Iron Crown now kind of doesn't really have a huge amount of options. Like, it's got Tachyon Cutter, it's got Psychic. You're not really running Expanding Force on this. I don't think anything on this team actually gets the option to click Psychic Terrain, so you're never really clicking Expanding Force. So beyond that, like, you can click a Terra Blast, you can maybe go for a Calm Mindset or something, but you're really lacking any kind. Like, Iron Crown is not a versatile Pokemon, I think is the bigger issue there, which means as a first pick, you end up in a bit of a weird position, especially with Ogerpon as your second pick, Rock Ogerpon. Between the two of them, you're not really hitting Steel types, which is what some of the later picks make up for, like Okidogi Entei, very good into Steel types. Rotom Wash doesn't take any damage from Steel types at all, which is pretty nice. But again, like, Salamence doesn't really like Steel types that much. I think Okidogi is also a slightly strange pick, because Okidogi's main niche in, like, actual Reg F is being good into, like, Incineroar or Rillaboom cores, because it potentially has upper hand to get around Fake Out. Its Guard Dog ability means that you can't intimidate it. So it's very nice into those two. It's got fighting and poison coverage to hit the two Fake Out bros. But in a draft format, there's only one Incineroar, there's only one Rillaboom. You're not facing Intimidate that much. Like, you can maybe get away with going Toxic Chain on that if you really want to, but there's not really anything else on this team that wants to abuse poison very much. So, I don't know, Okidogi, again, maybe Fede is cooking something that I'm just not seeing, but Okidogi seems like a very strange third pick there. There's also kind of middling speed tiers on this team, like Iron Crown, base 98, not that fast. Ogerpon's 110, which is decent, but that is the fastest base speed on this team. And there's not really any speed control in either direction. You don't have a Trick Room option, unless, I think... Can Iron Crown click Trick Room? I don't know if it can. I don't think it can. Maybe it can. I don't know. But, I mean, you don't really want to either way. Your only speed control other than that is going to be Salamence with Tailwind, or maybe like Electro on Rotom, so a real lack of speed control there. I think it's going to be quite easy to get a speed advantage against this team. You've got Sableye, I guess. Sableye has Quash and Thunder Wave you can maybe use, but that doesn't really give you team-wide speed control, like spread speed control or anything like that. And Sableye is... It's an annoying little gremlin, but it can only really kind of slow down one mon at a time, and it's not that hard to get rid of. So I think the lack of speed control could also be a bit of a problem for Fede. That said, I think the overall kind of type diversity on this team, you've got Fire, Water, Grass, which is nice with Entei. Like, Entei's a very, very good pick, I think, in draft, because, again, that 100 base speed suddenly becomes a lot more threatening in a draft format. Sacred Fire is a very scary move when there's fewer options to check it. I think Entei is a very, very nice pickup. Rotom, maybe a touch expensive. I think also, like, Sableye for 11 you could get more out of. Snorlax for 10 you could maybe get more out of. Okidogi for 13, Iron Crown for 16. I think some of this is just a case of, like, some of the Pokemon he's got maybe aren't worth the price tag associated with them. And again, I think it feels like there's just kind of a lack of any real synergy here. You've got maybe some Belly Drum options with Snorlax, or Ice Cube, actually. There's two Belly Drum users here, but again, like, Ice Cube's not a real Pokemon for the most part. Maybe there's a case where you think it's very good in your opponent's particular draft, you can bring it, but this is kind of an 8-mon team, and it feels a little bit directionless to me. And again, like, maybe Fede will prove me wrong, and this team will be the best team in the entire draft, and I'm just missing about 15 different interactions. But this one feels a little bit weird. That said, Fede is a good enough player that I am choosing to, as he asked us to, trust the process. So we will, we'll see what he cooks up. Next up, we have the second best random battles player in the draft, freezai, and his Mount Freeze Merchants. And this is the most 7 Pokemon team possible in this draft. Like, he got to the end of his 7th pick with only 2 points left and could only pick 2 1-point Pokemon, and I'll be honest with you, Farigiraf and Gothita. As far as 1-point picks go, I guess maybe he could be worse, but they're not good Pokemon. I would be very surprised if freezai brings either of them really to any of his sets or gets any use out of them at the very least. This is very much a 7 Pokemon team. freezai's gone all in on his strategy for this draft, and that said, it is very effective. Like, you do end up with those 7 Pokemon because you've spent so many points on them being very threatening, but it does give you a bit less versatility as the trade-off for that. So this team has 2 very obvious modes here with the kind of priority spam with Chien-Pao, Dragonite, and Arcanine with extreme speed as well. Kind of falls into that category, and then the rain mode with Politoed, Basculegion, and Archaludon. It's worth noting here that freezai did pick up Archaludon and Basculegion before picking up Politoed, which is brave, but also, I guess you can kind of gamble on no one wanting to pick up Politoed once all the other rain pieces are gone, so I think it makes sense. And then the last Pokemon that rounds out this team is Amoonguss, which is just a really good glue piece in general. So like I said, this team does have 2 very obvious modes with the Prio Spam and the Rain, but I think they have different enough answers and cover each other well enough that you can get away with it. Like, Pokemon that want to sit in front of Rain, like your kind of grass types, water types, they don't really do that well into Chien-Pao, Dragonite, and on the flip side, Pokemon like Steel types that you might want to stick in front of Chien-Pao, Dragonite, or bulky water types that want to go in front of kind of Arcanine and Chien-Pao, don't really deal very well with Archaludon, Basculegion, Politoed as a combination. I think Archaludon in particular does actually do quite well at covering the Chien-Pao, Dragonite mode in terms of its weaknesses, and then Amoonguss also is just a very nice piece for once you've got your key threats on the field, keeping them alive. Like Redirection next to Archaludon, for example, is very, very scary. Pollen Puff next to Archaludon, very scary. I think Politoed also benefits from there being fewer automatic weather setters in the format. Like, no one's picked up Torkoal, no one's picked up Fire-type Ninetales. There is someone with a lot of Ninetales we will get to in just a second. But yeah, like, there's one Tyranitar, but there's not a huge amount of weather setters. The flip side of that is, when you know that you're going to play into a Politoed, you can just tech weather onto a lot of Pokemon that will get weather as an option. Like Sableye, for example, or Whimsicott can run Sunny Day, and if you know you're playing into this team, Sunny Day is a pretty solid option. So that's kind of the flip side of that. I think in terms of kind of the more obvious gaps in this team, the first one is the defensive backbone is a little bit lacking in places. Like, your only fairy resist is Amoonguss, and there's quite a few fairy, an Arcanine, but there's quite a few fairy weaknesses here. You've got no dragon resistances at all without terastallizing, which is not ideal, so that's maybe a little bit exploitable. It is a very offensive team, and a lot of the time offensive teams don't need to have that defensive backbone because they just kind of KO you before you KO them, but that is something definitely to note. The other thing I'd mention with this team is maybe kind of opposing speed control could be a bit of a problem, because you've got maybe Tailwind on Dragonite, but beyond that, like, you've not got Tropichrome, you've not got Tailwind other than on Dragonite. Dragonite really wants to just be clicking attacks on this team next to Chien-Pao most of the time. Mind you, we have seen Tailwind Dragonite on rain teams before in like Regulation H, but yeah, you're kind of lacking in terms of strong speed control options, which means that maybe opposing Tailwind or opposing Tropichrome could be a little bit tricky. Amoonguss, again, can help you get through opposing speed control, but leaning that heavily on one Pokemon for that can be a little bit difficult. You've also got a lot of priority moves which can help, but I could see opposing speed control, again, next to maybe like a Terra Ghost to get around extreme speeds, or Terra Steel or something to get around extreme speed and Sucker Punch, being a little bit tricky. On the whole, this is basically a 7 Pokemon team, which is a bit of a downside, but it is a very scary 7 Pokemon, so it's definitely one that you can't afford to not respect. Next up, we have Colin Hire, aka TheBattleRoom, and his Milwaukee Marils, and I think Colin has one of the scariest drafts in this entire event. So there's an obvious primary mode with kind of physical Pokemon spam. We've seen this in Regulation F a decent amount with Gouging Fire next to Oakland Wellspring and King Gambit, are 3 Pokemon you'll very often see on the same team. You also got Slitherwing as a physical Pokemon. Maybe Pheasant Tipity if you're feeling really a little bit stupid. But yeah, you've got that core of the physical spam Pokemon. You've got Howl on Gouging Fire, and Breaking Swipe, again, very good option. Gouging Fire, a really good utility Pokemon, I think, in draft. So you got that primary mode, but there's also a real amount of depth to this team. So kind of the second obvious strategy or pairing you've got there is the Alolan Ninetales and Articuno with the kind of Blizzard spam freeze team, the one that no one likes playing against. But again, like Gouging Fire, Ninetales is also just a nice toolkit to have in draft. A lot of the cruxes of these kind of obvious strategies are also very versatile. Ninetales can just run Aurora Veil, it's got speed control. I like Aurora Veil, Encore Disable stuff next to... You've got a couple of potential setup Pokemon. You've got maybe Dragon Dance, Gouging Fire, you've got Swords Dance, King Gambit. Ogerpon gets Swords Dance, Moltres gets Nasty Plot. So you've got a lot of setup options and a lot of bulk on this team, so you can also use your kind of key pieces for the obvious strategies for different roles. And that, again, that kind of versatility is very, very important in drafts, in my opinion, just because it means that you're much harder to prep into. You can't just say, okay, well, I'm going to bring these Pokemon to deal with the physical spam, and I'm going to bring these Pokemon to deal with the freeze mode, because what if you prep too hard for Gouging Fire Ogerpon, and Articuno Ninetales has two distinct lead pairs, but then your opponent leads Ninetales Gambit, and now has a King Gambit setting up Source Dance Fine Veil, right? That kind of versatility is going to be very, very dangerous, and I think that's one of the things that makes this team so strong. It's just got so many different options, despite having some obvious game plans. I think one thing to note in terms of typing on this team is that you don't have any Fairy resists apart from Fezandipity, which is obviously not an amazing Pokemon. But I don't think that's actually too bad, because there's only really one strong offensive Fairy type in Regulation F, and there's only one of those in the draft, and that's Fluttermane, right? So you don't have to deal with Fluttermane that much, and this team does have answers for Fluttermane. Obviously, King Gambit, but like an Assault Vest Ironhead can deal a lot of damage into it. Ogerpon and Gouging Fire are decent. Like Ogerpon can obviously go Terra Water, just boost its special defense. Gouging Fire can crash it. If you're running Booster Energy, you can force opposing Fluttermane to run Booster Energy, which is always a nice boost. Did I say the word boost too much there? I feel like I said the word boost too much there. Anyway, you get what I mean. Like, you can force opposing Fluttermane into running Booster Energy, which means they're not running Specs, which is very handy because it means that now they're not nearly as threatening with, like, Specs Moonblast, for example. So I think that weakness isn't too bad, and also, like, Articuno just has a bunch of special defense. Like I said, Ogerpon can run a bunch of special defense. Moltres has a bunch of special defense, it can Terrastallize. I think the other thing that you can't overlook on this draft is the amount of, like, positive variance it introduces. So, when I say positive variance, what I mean is, like, RNG that can basically exclusively go in Colin's favor. So something like Chiyu, for example, has variance in that when it clicks Heat Wave it can miss, but also it can burn, right? That could go either way. And then you've got moves that could just miss. Like, I think, something like Origin Pulse, for example, on Kyogre, obviously that's not going to be a thing in this format, but that's kind of strictly negative variance, in that you're introducing a potential downside, but only for you. Obviously, the upside is you get to click Origin Pulse, but you know what I mean. So when I say that this team has a lot of positive variance, what I mean is that you've got stuff like the Blizzard spam, right? You can't miss your Blizzards, but you can get freeze chances, so that's RNG that can only ever go in your favor. Same with Snowcloak and Articuno, that can only ever go in your favor, right? You can only ever get positive RNG from your opponent missing. Same with Fiery Wrath on Moltres, you can get flinches with that, there's no downside. Same with Toxic Chain, for example, on Fezandipity, you just get chances for bonus RNG. Even something like the increased crit chance on Ogerpon is super nice for that. So yeah, there's a lot of positive RNG on this team and not really a huge amount of negative variance, which I think is a factor that makes it very, very difficult to play around. It's very hard to build lines into something where you go, okay, well I could just bring in my Steel type and tank the Blizzards, but then if you get frozen by one of the Blizzards that hit you, now suddenly your answer to the Ice Spam is kind of out of action. So having that as well, like obviously I imagine Colin is not going to plan for, oh, I'll just get the freeze turn 1 as part of his game plans, but it gives so many more opportunities to get ahead, which is something very, very scary about this team on the whole. And also Rhydon's there, I didn't mention Rhydon already, but Rhydon's also a cool pick. You got a couple of flying types, you maybe don't like Raging Bolt very much on this team. Actually, you really don't like Raging Bolt on this team. Like Assault Vest Raging Bolt seems very annoying. Wait, Rhydon actually slaps. I'm overlooking Rhydon, never mind. And also Rhydon sits nicely next to Gouging Fire, for example. It's a fun option. I think this is also one of the more well-rounded teams in that you don't really have any Pokemon on there that are just a waste of space. Like, all of these Pokemon are perfectly viable. Like, they all have niches. So I think, like I said, this is one of the scarier teams in the entire draft, in my opinion. Next up, we got the guy with the best hair in the draft league, and that's me. I'm not going to talk too much about my draft, because I don't really want to accidentally give something away. Because obviously I have more insight into what my plans are than other people are. I don't want to say something and people are like, oh, I didn't think about that. But yeah, I think my draft, again, is kind of similar to some of the other ones we've seen, where it's got a couple of primary game modes, the obvious one being the Size Spam. I've got Indeedee, Arm Rouge, Gallade. That's obviously an option. I can go like Hard Trip, Size Spam. I've also got options with Roaring Moon of going like Tailwind. I think Ursaluna can kind of fit into both those modes. So I think again, I kind of built my entire draft around having a bunch of options. That's kind of what I'm leaning into with this draft. I think I've done a pretty good job with this draft. I think this draft is pretty solid. It's not got the same degree of like, oh, you need to be so scared of this as some other drafts do, apart from maybe the size spam mode. But I think the degree of versatility can also kind of counterbalance that, would be what I will say about my own draft. Okay, before we get to our next player, I'd like to issue a very formal apology to everyone, all my viewers. I did lie to you. Michael was absolutely not the only person with an 11 Pokemon team. We've in fact got 2 in a row to round out our draft, and the first one of those is Joe 9 and his New York Yveltals. Now, Joe's draft is really interesting, because the first 6 Pokemon here, the Iron Hands Lando, Arcanine Cinny, Grimmsnarl Milotic, that's just a good core of 6. Like, that is a team that is scary. I think you could tell me he's bringing those 6, and I'd still probably struggle to find a clean way through that, right? Even knowing what's coming. That's a really, really good set of Pokemon. It's got a lot of bulk with Milotic, Iron Hands, Grimmsnarl Sinistcha. Like, it's got a lot of synergies with Sinistcha getting Trick Room for Iron Hands, Hospitality and Life Dew healing up Milotic and Iron Hands. Very nice screens in front of all these really bulky Pokemon is very strong. Type synergy, obviously fantastic. You've got the Fire Water Grass core. Landorus is a very, very scary Pokemon. Like, just the damage out from that is crazy. It's got Fake Out options. It's got Redirection options. It's got, like I said, it's got Trick Room. Really, really strong set of Pokemon, I think. Not only that, though, I think Joe spent a lot of points on that top 6, and that makes that top 6 very scary, but he's also found a really nice way of rounding out the last 5. He's not just gone, okay, I've used a bunch of points on these first 6, let's just get 3 more Pokemon, call it a day. He's actually picked 5 pretty viable Pokemon. And Pokemon that I think, most notably, you need to respect. Even if he doesn't bring a lot of these Pokemon, you need to respect the fact that they are there. Like, most notably, you've got the Coughing Slaking combo, which is, it's basically just Wheezing Slaking, but the Wheezing is a bit smaller. Slaking, Slacking. I think I actually said Slaking on stream a while ago, and people were having a go at me for that. Slacking. I'm gonna say Slacking. Anyway, yes, you've got the Coughing Slacking combo, which is obviously very scary. Slacking, like, its stat block is crazy. It's a Pokemon you can get pretty early on in the actual mainline games, and anyone who's played Gen 3 will tell you that God Norman is an absolute nightmare, because this thing has, like, legendary stats. Like, more than legendary stats. Its stat total is crazy. So that's a threat that you need to be very aware of. You can't be complacent about the Slacking Coughing mode. So it just adds an extra layer of complication there. Like, he doesn't even need to bring it, but if he does bring it and you're not prepared for it, then suddenly you can kind of get run through by it. I think in terms of low point picks as well, Orthworm was a Pokemon I kind of had my eye on for a bit. It's got a lot of versatility. Well, not a lot of versatility, maybe the wrong option. It's got a niche, though, being immune to ground and being a steel type positions it quite well into something like Skraw's draft, for example, where I think Skraw maybe wants to be leaning on Landorus to deal with steel types in general. But now you want a steel type that you can't hit with Landorus, and so now Orthworm becomes a bit of a threat to his kind of front 4 Pokemon. So I think that's definitely got a niche, and Riolu and Yanma are very good picks for 2 and 1 point each. Just having a prankster Pokemon in general is always nice. Riolu has some somewhat interesting options. It's got, like, Coaching, Helping Hand, it gets Rain Dance and Sunny Day. It's got Copycat, which is a weird niche thing into certain opposing teams. And then Yanma's got Tailwind, it's got Hypnosis, it's got Faint as well, if you want to use it as an offensive piece. Speed Boost plus Hypnosis, Speed Boost plus Tailwind is always a nice option. So that's one of the things I think with the kind of core 6, the top 6 there, Iron Hands through Milotic, is that it doesn't really have any speed control outside of Trick Room, so having that speed control option with Yanma Tailwind could be very nice. There's potentially some teams that maybe don't deal very well with Landorus under Tailwind, for example. So I think that's a very, very nice pickup there as well. I think this draft on the whole also very scary. Like I said, the top 6 is just a very, very strong team that's hard to prep for by itself, but also you can't just prep for that because there's so many options that you need to cover in the kind of lower point support Pokemon. I think that's one of the things that makes this draft extra difficult to get through, is how well Joe has used the remainder of his points for his less expensive picks. And last up, you've seen 222 Dozo, but now we've got the 2222 Dozo draft with the TheUziGunner and his Thunderclap Titans. First picking Raging Bolt, very on brand. If you've seen his logo, it is, I'll back on screen here actually. Here's his logo, it's a Raging Bolt. He first picked Raging Bolt, it's very on brand. I think that Uzi's draft strategy was really, really interesting, because Uzi is at the end of our Snake, and the way Snake draft works is you got an order 1 through 12, and then once you get to the end, you go in reverse order. So what that means is that pick number 12 will get 2 picks in a row. It's arguably the best place to be in a draft. It's really interesting. And so you see this construction of this kind of 2-2-2-2-2-2-2-2-2. All these pairings with Annihilate, Mousehold, with Weezing Regigigas, with, Regigigas Toadscrawl, Tatsugiri Dondozo. But you'll notice that none of these pairs were picked at the same time. So his first 2 picks were, oh sorry, that's a lie, Weezing Regigigas was. But his first 2 picks were Raging Bolt and Annihilate, and I think that's very sensible, knowing that Annihilate is just a very strong standalone Pokemon, and if no one takes Mousehold by the time the draft gets back to him, then he gets Mousehold, he gets a nice pairing there. And again, the pick with Dondozo. Dondozo's a decent standalone Pokemon, especially in draft, because it is surprisingly versatile in how you can play it. You can run it as a setup Pokemon with Curse, you can run it with Yawn as full support. It's got a range of very good abilities. Very, very irritating Pokemon. We've seen Solo Dozo do stuff in, like, Reg H before. But then, the other thing is, Tatsugiri is pretty expensive, right? Tatsugiri is 12 points. If you look at other stuff that's worth 12 points, we've got, let me find some examples here. So a couple of examples just looking at kind of the previous drafts we've looked at. Like, Armarouge is 12 points, Milotic is 12 points, Galarian Moltres is 12 points. Tatsugiri as a standalone Pokemon is not nearly as good as any of those. And so it's a pretty safe bet for Uzi that once he's taken that Dozo, it's unlikely anyone's going to take the Tatsugiri unless they really desperately want to snipe him specifically. Like, Annihilate you can afford to take by itself because it's just a fine Pokemon by itself. Dondozo, again, fine by itself, and also no one is likely to take Tatsugiri. And then his next 2 picks were Weezing Regigigas, which is obviously a good pairing by itself. But I think that draft strategy is really, really smartly done, in that I think he's potentially had a plan at the start of the draft knowing he wants to pick up all these pairings, and that he potentially can if he wants to because he's at the end of the draft order, gets 2 picks in a row, but also recognizing that he doesn't need to, and that he can establish himself getting these pairings, like get the good Pokemon in Raging Bolt first, and then establish these pairings, establish Annihilate, establish Dondozo, and be able to use them by themselves, and also just challenge people to go, okay, take Tatsugiri if you want to, right? Fine. If you take Tatsugiri, I've got a better standalone Pokemon than you have, and you've spent a lot of points on it. Right, so I think that draft strategy of just establishing these pairings early, and then grabbing the second parts of them later, very, very smartly done. Enough about draft strategy. Like I said, this is a draft that's built around particular pairings, but also is surprisingly versatile. Like, Regigigas you don't really want to run without Weezing, but like Tatsugiri you don't really want to run without Dondozo, but at the same time, like, as I said, a lot of these Pokemon are good as standalones. Mousehold can combo with pretty much anything, just like having Redirect and Friend Guard is super nice. And then you also just got a lot of lead options to cover. Like, find me something that deals with Mouseape and Dondozo Tatsugiri and Weezing Regigigas all at the same time. Like, find me something that covers all of those, and I'm willing to bet that you can't. It's very, very difficult. So even though, again, this feels similar to Justin Tang's team, the kind of sand, Sizebound stuff, in that there's a couple of pretty clearly defined strategies, but there is room to be flexible within those. There's a lot of versatility on the individual Pokemon. Like, even if you know that your opponent's going Dozo Tatsugiri, Dozo could run any Terra type, it can run a bunch of different moves, it can run Terra Blast, it can run Heavy Slam, it can run Order Up, it can run Body Press if you want to. Tatsugiri could be Scarf, could be Sash, could be Goggles, it could have Taunt, it could have Muddy Water, it could have Draco, it could have Icy Wind, right? So there's flexibility in each of the pairings, there's also flexibility with how the Pokemon fit in with each other. So it's not just as simple as, okay, cover the 3 obvious pairings, right? So I think this is a very interesting put together team, one that's very difficult to plan for, and I would know because I am playing Uzi in week 1, and I've already been planning for this team, and I've been running in circles trying to figure out what I'm doing into it. So, very, very scary. I think it's less kind of lead roulette-y than maybe you'd expect it to be, given how much it really feels like you want to be doing particular leads. So yeah, we'll see how that goes in week 1. Look out for that video. I think it'll be like this time next week. But yeah, that is going to be all for this video. We've gone over all of the drafts, which ones I think are the scariest, which ones I think maybe are less scary, sorry Fede. Kind of what I think the key options are, how the pieces fit together, which I love doing. I really like draft, and hopefully that comes across in this video. But yeah, that is what I'm going to be up against. Like I said in the intro, this is going to be up to 10 weeks of matches, potentially playing against 10 different people. If I make it to the next phase, I'll be playing against at least a minimum of 8 different people. And so we'll see how well that goes. But yeah, I am really looking forward to this. Hopefully you guys are looking forward to it as well. Like I said, next up we have Uzi and his 2 draft, which should be a really interesting, I guess, puzzle almost to try and solve. I'll say, having already done some of the planning for that, you might like some of the text I'm bringing to it. Some of it's very interesting. But yeah, keep your eyes peeled for more draft content, and I will see you all in the first week match against Uzi next week. Don't miss it.